Finally, it has happened. The Tokyo absolute rankings for the Olympics for weightlifting are out. What that means is we now have almost the final idea, the final picture of who is going to be competing in which category. So what I'm going to do today in this video is break it down into three parts. The first is what has happened just now and what do we now have access to, i.e. what does this all actually mean? The second part is going to be the stats, looking at just some interesting analysis, looking at the numbers, different countries, continents, all that side of things. And then the third part, I'm going to look at who isn't there, who is there, and if there's anything interesting in terms of the actual athletes who have been selected. But before I do, this week's episode is actually going to be sponsored by the Weightlifting House wrist straps. These will be out by the time this video airs. Now these things really are on another level of quality. We spent a long time on this. We spent a lot of effort trying to make sure that these were actually strong. I feel like there are two types of wrist straps. There are those that just warm the wrists, which some people do like in all fairness, and there are those that add a tremendous amount of support to the wrists. That's what these are. I'll put a link down below if you want to check them out. Okay, so what most recently happened was that the IWF sent information to countries who had athletes in qualifying positions and asked those countries to do one of two things. They had to either decide which of their athletes they were going to send to the Olympics in the situation where they'd qualified more than the amount that they could send, i.e. China had more than 8 athletes, USA had more than 8 athletes, Colombia had more than 8 athletes. Or in a situation where they had an athlete who'd qualified in more than one category, they just had to select which category they wanted to send the athlete into. Based off that information that the member federations sent back to the IWF released the absolute rankings, which we now have access to. Now these absolute rankings are almost final except for a few things. So let's just go through what those things might be so that we can anticipate any potential changes that might change these rankings over the coming couple of weeks. So the first sort of caveat is to do with the host nation slots. So Japan being the host nation, they are guaranteed a certain number of slots. And that certain number is actually 3 on the men's side and 3 on the women's side. Now on the men's side, they have actually qualified 3 male weightlifters, so they don't get given any sort of host slot nations. But on the women's side, they kind of on the surface, it looks like they haven't qualified any women. And so they're going to get given 3 slots from which they can choose which athletes they want to send. So it's weird because it looks like actually the Japanese women's team did qualify 1 slot, but that Japan turned down that slot. So the slot could have been offered to Makiko Ando. She's a 59 kilo weightlifter, but they said that they didn't want it. Now, whether or not they're just doing that because they're trying to be nice and they're trying to allow another 59 kilo weightlifter into the top 8 so that they can then use their home nation slot, that might be what's going on. That's unlikely that they're going to be that friendly. Alternatively, and perhaps most likely, what they're doing is withdrawing her so that they can then see which other athletes other countries select before they decide that they actually do want to send Makiko Ando as their kind of host nation slot. The second potential change to this absolute rankings list is to do with the tripartite slots. So nations who have no other representation might get a chance to send an athlete to Tokyo. So the tripartite commission is made up of representatives from the IOC, the Association of National Olympic Committees, and the Association of Summer Olympic International Federations. And what they're going to do is essentially invite athletes from nations which would otherwise have no representation at the Olympics. So in practice, that means that most of these places go to smaller nations, usually from the developing world. And there is 1 slot in each category where Japan does not use a host nation slot. There are right now 92 nationals who are eligible to be considered for a tripartite commission slot. 35 from Africa, 17 from Pan America, 18 from Asia, 9 from Europe, 13 from Oceania. And then the third and final thing which might disrupt this absolute ranking list is to do with Colombia, Vietnam, and Romania. Those 3 countries are still in the rankings, even though there's a very good chance that they may well be removed and banned from competing. Right now, Colombia has 8 slots, Vietnam has 3, and Romania has 1. They've only qualified Loredana Toma. But, for example, Colombia with 8 slots, they're one of only 4 countries to have qualified 8 slots. If they are banned, that's going to change enormous amounts of things with the rankings as 8 new athletes move into qualifying slots. So right now, Colombia, we put up an article on this, they have lost out the case of arbitration for sport. So it looks like they're going to be out of the Olympics. So essentially, the Colombian Weightlifting Federation failed in its bid to overturn 3 anti-doping decisions to rule it out of the Tokyo Olympics in July. So right now, Colombia is appealing that, but seeing as there is no new information that can be presented to the court, it looks like probably Colombia will be removed. So there's 8 new slots that are going to suddenly appear. So that's it. Now let's look at some of the stats. Okay, so the first thing we can look at, which is quite interesting, which we have here on the screen, is the number of athletes that each continent has actually qualified. So we can see that Asia has qualified 54 athletes, Europe 48, Pan America 47, then there's a large drop. We have 16 from Oceania, 13 from Africa, and then there is 1 athlete who's competing. It says IOC there. That means the refugee team, and that's Cyril Thatchett, who I mentioned in the news show last week. What's also interesting here is we can start seeing which of the categories are dominated by a certain continent. Here, for example, the men's 109s, there are 6 European weightlifters, 5 Asian weightlifters in the men's 61s and the men's 67s. And those are the most sort of dominated by a particular continent on the men's side. Then on the women's side, we have 5 Asian weightlifters in the women 49s, 7 Asian weightlifters in the women's 55s. That's the most dominated by any continent that there is of a category. We have in the women's 87s, 7 Pan-American weightlifters, which is absolutely incredible. And then if we look over to this graph and we look at how many athletes each country has qualified, as you can see, only 4 countries have actually qualified 8 weightlifters, which is the maximum. We have the USA, Korea, Colombia, and China. Colombia might be removed, so then it's going to be narrowed down to just 3. Qualifying 5 slots, we have Tunisia. No, surely not. Is that Tunisia? TUN? Let's just check that quickly. TUN, Tunisia. Who'd have thought? Okay, so with 5 slots, we have Tunisia, Taiwan, Turkmenistan, New Zealand, Indonesia, Dominican Republic, Canada, and Austria. Or is that Australia? That's Australia. AUT is Austria, so Australia. We have a fair few qualifying 4, 3, 2, and then the majority, basically, or the smallest, or the largest minority have just sent 1 athlete per country. So what I'm going to do now is just talk about a few of the athletes who are in interesting situations. Either they haven't been selected, or they have and we didn't expect that, or there's a few changes that might mean that certain athletes do actually appear. Whilst I do that, we're just going to have, so I don't have to go through every single category, all of the qualifying athletes from each category going through category by category on the side, so you can just look at those as I go through interesting athletes. So one of the people I want to mention that it's going to be a real shame not to see is Gormanasyan, the Armenian super heavyweight. He's one of the greatest snatchers of all time. He's one of 4 weightlifters ever to snatch 216 kilos. Of course, one of them is Lasha. And the reason we're not going to see him is because Armenia can only send 1 male weightlifter, which means, I suppose, good news, we are going to see Simon Martirosyan in the 109s, the world record holder in the total, competing against guys like Akbar Jurayev. That's going to be a fantastic session, but it does mean that we're not going to see Gormanasyan. And in fairness, that is totally okay, because Armenia ought to be punished for all of the pops that they have had. In terms of Armenia's thought process, it was, despite the fact that Simon Martirosyan wasn't in the best shape at the Asian Championships, there is no world in which Gormanasyan can get a gold medal because he's going up against Lasha. Whereas there's just a very good chance that Simon Martirosyan will indeed get that gold. The next interesting thing on the women's side in Team China is that they have actually selected the 49 kilo weightlifter Hu Zihui rather than Deng Wei. Now, I did a video a few weeks ago where I went through who I thought Team China would select, and I got it right all except one person. And in fact, on the women's side, the person for whom I did the least analysis was Deng Wei, because I thought that she was the most obvious. She's the most consistent, she holds all the world records, she has the easiest win, and she has the most accomplishments on the women's side. What I didn't anticipate was that, as I think we can only assume, she must be injured, and so she's not been selected. The top weightlifter, in fact, in the world on the women's side, second in terms of Roby points behind Guo Chen, Deng Wei, is not going to the Olympics, which means that the world record holder in the snatch and maybe total, Hu Zihui is going to be going to Tokyo instead. And if we just take a very quick look at the 49 kilo rankings, we can see that Hu Zihui still has the heaviest total in that category at 213. And then behind her, we're not going to see Zhang Huihua and we're not going to see Ri Som-gum. So the closest competitor is from India, Chanu Mirabai, with 205 kilos as her best. So we still have Hu Zihui 8 kilos over anyone else in the total. So unfortunately, we will not be seeing the queen of weightlifting on the women's side, but we will still be seeing one of the greatest weightlifters in the world take her place. The next thing to mention, and I think the thing that people are most upset about, is that there is no Tiantao. Heart Attack Tiantao will not be competing at Tokyo. I assumed this was going to be the case. Part of me wanted to believe that there was a way in which we would be seeing Tiantao go to the Olympics, but we haven't. Now, Yilin from Squat Jock Journalist put out a really good interview that he did with Tiantao just after Tian had learnt the news. I'd highly recommend you go and watch it. It's only about 3 minutes long, but it is, in some ways, it's actually deeply moving to hear this all from his perspective. His career has been difficult. You know, he started off as a 77 kilo weightlifter where he was amazing. He clean and jerked 205 kilos. That's a better clean and jerk than we've seen from guys like Lee Dai-in, who've only done that at 81. He was then moved up to the 85 kilo category, which was the most competitive category at 2016. He finally found his footing and managed to sneak a medal despite going 2 for 6 at the Olympics. And then it took him even longer as he was forced up to that 96 kilo Olympic category, because what's the point of being 89 if there's no shot at it being an Olympic category? And it took him a while gaining strength and the weight. He had to go up against guys like Surab Muradi. Then finally in 2019, he won his first ever world championships. And even that wasn't enough. His miss to make ratio, the fact that he has someone in Mezzo Hisona who Team China clearly think is dangerous enough, meant that Tiantao was not selected. This may be the end of the road for Tian. He may be retiring after this. He will only be 30 in Paris. So if he wants to keep going, then, you know, there's a chance that he could do well and would be selected. However, this interview made it seem pretty much as though Tiantao was actually going to be saying farewell to the world of weightlifting. He also, and I thought this was quite funny, interesting, heartwarming, he said to Mezzo, congratulations on the gold medal, assuming that Mezzo's already won that now. Next, and I'm saying this somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but I feel like I have to say this because people will genuinely be asking in the comment section. No, Surab Muradi, Kinu Shustami, Mohamed Ihab and Ilya Ilyin will not be competing in Tokyo. They haven't qualified. It's over. Next, an interesting one, especially for those of us from Great Britain. Emily Godley was one of 4 weightlifters who we thought might qualify for this Olympic Games. Zoe Smith, Sarah Davies and Emily Campbell have. They're in great positions, all 3 of whom could genuinely medal at Tokyo also. Emily Godley, however, despite being incredible and winning so many medals recently, well, most recently even at the Europeans, isn't currently in an Olympic spot. However, if Colombia is removed from the Olympic Games, suddenly Emily Godley will move up into the continental slot, as the current continental slot holder for Europe will move into the top 8. Now, this is also the case for a few other weightlifters. 2 German female weightlifters also, in fact. So we have Sabine Kusterer, who actually, I don't think Germany has qualified any women outside of this method of getting in. So Sabine is a 59 kilo weightlifter. Right now she sits 11th in the world. There are athletes below her in the rankings who will go because they take the continental slot. But if the Colombian weightlifter who currently sits in 2nd is removed, then suddenly the athlete Konstantina Bentelli from Greece will move into the top 8 and Sabine will take that continental slot. This is the same for her teammate Lisa Schweitzer, the 64 kilo weightlifter. If, once again from Colombia, Mercedes Perez is removed from competition, she'll move into that continental slot, currently held by Nure Levent, who will move into the top 8. Also, very quickly, while we're on the 64 kilo category, with Deng Wei gone, and now it looks like Toma's in there, although Romania could be removed, things get very exciting. If Romania is removed and Loredana disappears, and then the Colombian weightlifter disappears, and I've been saying this for a while on the podcast, my money will then be on Maud Charon from Canada to actually take that gold medal. If none of those things happen, I still think we'll see Maud medal for sure. But she's in a situation where, for an athlete who's not actually been involved in the sport for that long, though she's been an athlete for many years, you can check out our incredible podcast that we did for a few months ago. She may be in the slot to take home a gold medal for Canada. Another interesting thing, let's move to the men's 81 kilo category. So we have Liu Xiaojun, the GOAT, the legend. I'm very pleased to see him there. But then a few athletes who people will be interested who won't have made the cut. It's a shame to see that Alex Bellemare from Canada didn't make the Pan American slot. In fact, Ali Mendez did. A video has been circulating of Ali Mendez snatching, it looks like 170. It might honestly be 160. I'm not convinced that second 25 is actually a 25. I think it might be a 20. There's a lot of shadow on it. But it also could be old. I'm not sure. But potentially Ali Mendez is actually in good shape right now. And then the other athlete who I know a lot of us know and love who won't be making it is Sean Brown from Ireland. He also didn't quite make out on the European slot. He's just a few rugby points off. But a huge congratulations to those athletes who attempted and almost made it. In the 73 is also worth talking about. Obviously, Shizi Yong is by far and away the number one ranked weightlifter here. Interesting to see that CJ Cummings came out with the second slot and then Andrea Bozidar from Bulgaria took the third. Now, a few things worth noting. My boy Robu Marin, Stanky Leg Marin, didn't make the slot and neither did Max Lang. So both of these weightlifters, I mean, they couldn't be further apart in terms of technique. One is what a lot of people would call absolute perfection. The other is what a lot of people would call succeeding in spite of your own technique. But both of them fantastic lifters, haven't quite made that European slot. The slot will in fact go to, from Spain, David Lopez Sanchez. And then another thing which people might be finding confusing, in fact, if we go to the 109s, you'll see a good example of this. You can see right there in third, Timur Naniev, a Russian weightlifter. But Russia can't compete, so what's Timur Naniev doing there? Well, there is a way around this. Here's what's going on. So Russia is not allowed to compete, but they can have Russian athletes competing under a different, not a country, but it's called the Russian Olympic Committee, ROC. There will be no RUS, it will be ROC. Those athletes will not be able to compete under their own flag, but they can compete under a flag that has the same colors of Russia. So we're going to see red, white, and blue. We're just going to see it manipulated somewhat to be as close to the Russian flag as they can get away with without it actually being the Russian flag. They're also not allowed a Russian anthem, nor are they allowed to say that they compete for Russia. So that's what's happening here. So Timur Naniev will be competing under the ROC, the Russian Olympic Committee. Also, a quick correction that needs to be made. I mentioned in a few episodes ago that Enzo Kuoki had qualified for the Olympics. I believe that he had. I made a mistake. I'm really sorry for the guy. He's an absolutely phenomenally talented teenager. Somehow he's a teenager. The guy is enormous. Though he ranked 12th in the world, he did not make that continental spot. It actually went in the end to Jiří Orsag from the Czech Republic, a tremendous clean and jerker. The final thing that I thought would be interesting to do is just look at the top 20 weightlifters in the world on the men's side and on the women's side. After this incredibly long, tiring, amazing, problematic qualification process that I've attempted to document for you guys over the last 18 months, now that it's come to an end, it's just interesting to see who actually are the best athletes by Roby points in the world. So it's no surprise on the men's side that Lash Talikadze comes out at number one. He is historically the most impressive weightlifter here. He's the only weightlifter here in the world who is doing things that no one else has ever done. Every other weightlifter is just doing something slightly in the shadows of a historical legend. Lasha sits at one with 5,300 Roby points. We then have Shi Ziyong, Chen Lijun, Tiantao, Li Dayin, Li Feibin, Liu Xiaojun. Notice how all of these weightlifters that I've mentioned are Chinese. Then there's Simon Martirosyan. And it's worth bearing in mind, some of these weightlifters that I've mentioned in the top 10, we're not seeing. We're not seeing Tiantao, we're not seeing Li Dayin, we're not seeing Gor Minassian. Then there's Mezo Hisona at number 10, Yang Zhe we're not going to see. Clarence Cummings at CJ, Andreev Bozidar, Eko Yuli Irawan, who will be there. We're going to see a great battle between him and, of course, Li Feibin in the 67s. Brian Rodriguez Carvajal in the 80, well, he's going to be in 81. He's going to be really exciting to see. Akbar Jurayev, Julio Mayora, Feng Ludong, who we won't see, Huang Minhao, who we won't see, and Oh Kang Chol, who we won't see. Moving over now to the top 20 women. Kuo Sing Chen at number 1, 5,154 Roby points. Just behind her, the only other weightlifter on the women's side over 5,000 is Deng Wei, who we will not be seeing. Then there is Hu Zihui, Zhang Huihua, Li Wenwen, Qiu Xiu Sim, Lao Qiyun, Chen Gui Ming, Rim Jong Sim. I mean, half of these weightlifters we're not going to see in Tokyo. Zhang Wang Li, Li Ajun, Loredana Toma, Meng Su Ping, Ri Song-gum, Chanu Mirabai, Rim and Sim, Wang Zuyu, Zhang Rong, Luo Xiaoming, and Ando Mikiko. On the women's side, it's absolutely being decimated in terms of the athletes who have got into this top 20, this elite group in the world, and won't be competing. Now, part of that is because there is one of the countries there, North Korea, isn't sending anyone. The second reason is that China is so incredibly dominant. And the third is that athletes have quite rightly been popped. But still, it goes to show that it's very difficult to come up with a system that actually works and pleases everyone. Another thing that maybe people need to remember that I have said before, but I'll echo it again, is that when you're looking at the populations of different countries, things are so widely different that it causes issues. I mean, if you look at China, China has a larger population than Europe. But when we look at the stats, Europe is going to send 48 weightlifters. China's going to send 8. So that's the reason why we have so many incredible Chinese weightlifters who we won't see. If you imagine that we gave that same level of restriction to Europe and we said that Europe can only send 8 weightlifters, we would be losing out on some of the greatest weightlifters from around the European area. This is essentially what's going on in China. I don't necessarily know that there's a great way to do that without sort of violating the inclusion aspect of what the Olympics is supposed to be. The 2 pillars, elite weightlifting or elite sport, and also inclusion from around the world. But even so, it's worth bearing in mind that kind of disparity in terms of population of different countries and areas. Now that is where I'm going to absolutely wrap things up. Speaking of wraps, I didn't even mean to do that. This episode is sponsored by the Weightlifting House wrist straps. These things are absolutely beautiful. As you can see, we have this 3D embossed WH rubber, the home of weightlifters, the quality of the print, the quality of the straps themselves. I mean, this is a next level type of cotton fabric. The Velcro is incredibly strong. These aren't the type of wrist straps that just warm your wrists. If you like to have absolutely no restriction in movement, then maybe don't go for these. But if you want to actually have support that allows you to pass your force, your strength through this more wobbly wrist joint, then these are absolutely incredible. These are the best, the strongest, the greatest, the best looking wrist straps for weightlifting on the market. Guys, I hugely appreciate you tuning in. I will do another episode where I talk a little bit more about the predictions that I have for Tokyo in terms of gold, silver, and bronze position. Until then, I hope that you guys enjoyed looking at and listening to some of this analysis and that this whole qualification process makes a little bit more sense to you. I'll catch you all next time.